You're listening to the New Frontier Network with Chris Iversen and Victor Viggiani.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the NFN, the New Frontier Network, where we will be exploring the new frontiers of phenomenology, ufology, and exopolitics. I am honored and privileged to have as my co-host, he happens to be
Victor Viggiani, and the person you're listening to is Chris Iversen.
Chris Iversen. How you doing, everybody? We have a very distinguished panel of international correspondents with us, starting with Giorgio Picenza from Peru and now in Miami.
And not too far away from that is Kathleen Marden. She is now in Orlando, and we will probably be talking to Kathleen more later on as the year progresses about her wonderful books and her association with Stanton Friedman, and basically her identification with the issue of UFO contactees and abduction phenomenon.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Kathleen. We also have on our panel today Manuel Lameroy from South Africa by way of Belgium and a few other stops along the way. Manuel is an integral part of the International Board for Exopolitics, part of its founding, part of its driving force, and we are honored to have him here with us today. So thank you, Manuel.
Thank you.
We also have with us today from Portugal, a man with many names, many titles, and I'm honored to have to try to pronounce his name today, Francisco Mirao Correa, and who is a professor, a knowledgeable source on all kinds of phenomenology, the experiences that we've had. His brilliant, intelligent insight is more than welcome here with us today.
So to begin with, what I'd like to do is just, I know it's always a difficult part to launch into a bio of someone, and Richard and I have done several interviews before, and it's reading someone's bio is it's kind of difficult because it's very very humbling in some ways. And I know Paul Hellyer, when you read his bio, he always says, "Who are you talking about here? Who is that person?" So I'm going to launch into Richard's bio. So Richard is one of the world's leading researchers and writers on the UFO subject. He believes that UFOs constitute the greatest mystery of our time. He is the author of 2 volumes of history, UFOs and the National Security State, volumes 1 and 2, both of which are groundbreaking works which provide the most, as far as I'm concerned, and many do consider this, the most factually complete and accessible narrative on the UFO subject anywhere. Among his other works, Richard also has delved into a speculative piece of work called After Disclosure, What Comes Next? And he describes it as the first analysis not only of how the UFO secrecy might end, but the all-important question of what comes next. So with that very brief interview of our bio and for the interview, Richard, welcome to the New Frontier Network. Great to have you with us.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Christopher, for having me here with such a great panel.
Let's go back for a second, if we could, and I'll jog your memory, Rich, if I could, that in my living room back in 2005 with Stanton Friedman, and you were there, and Steve Bassett were sitting in the living room before the University of Toronto Symposium on Disclosure and Planetary Directions that we brought forward Paul Hellyer. If I could just have you spend a moment and make a comment on how significant you feel or felt at the time that event was so important in the whole idea of bringing things forward. What's your comment on that?
That was funny that you bring that up, Victor. That was it's very vivid in my memory to this day. It was 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time that the Honorable Paul Hellyer did come out, as it were, as a believer and promoter of the UFO reality. I remember sat next to Stanton Friedman in the front row while Paul spoke about his journey into exploring the reality of UFOs in his retirement. He emphasized that quite a bit. But the thing about Paul Hellyer is that he is, anyone who's met him can't forget the experience. There's something about him. There's a great deal of gravitas and dignity and intelligence and knowledge and wisdom. It's all rolled into one. So when he says things about the UFO subject, you really do want to pay attention and listen, because he's coming from tremendous experience and background. But I felt that event was very important, and I've never forgotten it. Steve Bassett was there. Paola Harris was there. You were there. It was a really good event, a very important event, I felt.
Yeah.
Incredible. To be the proverbial fly in the wall in that room would have been amazing.
In the living room.
I recall it vividly. Yeah. It was a different afternoon, because it was before the event, and all of the plans that we had made to put this whole symposium together were sort of like hanging by threads here and there, and hoping that we can all pull it together. And I recall vividly as Richard and Steve and Stanton did their presentations, and I believe, I'm not sure who was first. I think it was Stanton. In any respect,
Yeah.
It ended. The first half ended, and then we brought in Paul right at lunchtime, around 12 o'clock. And I had a good friend of mine bring Paul to the presentation at the time, and I was sitting at the back, sort of watching everything that was going on. And Mr. Hellier entered the room, and I walked forward with him through the front aisle at Convocation Hall, and there were 455 people at that event. And I don't know if you know Paul that well, but he's like 6'4", very imposing figure, very imposing. And as he walked down that aisle towards the podium, you could hear a pin drop on the carpet. It was, I don't know, it was a magical moment in a lot of ways. And to be a part of that event, as Rich was, and to sort of launch that kind of thing happening, it became a clock stopper, as I said in Paul's interview. So I think it is it'll be 15 years this September the 25th of that event. And I think we should, at least I know I'm starting to consider doing something special for that event, because I know Paul is writing a book about that.
It felt like a big moment in Canadian history, to be honest, or at least modern Canadian history, to have someone of his stature in Toronto coming out to speak about this subject. I just felt it was important on that basis.
Yeah, for sure. Chris, I know you've got a question about the idea of intrusions into airspace over some of the nuclear bases. Do you want to throw something into the mix with that, with Rich?
Absolutely. There's the importance of having somebody such as Paul, with his past position as the Minister of Defense for Canada, coming out and not just a la Jimmy Carter talking about a UFO that he had seen in the skies, or Reagan had indicated something similar. But here we have a high-ranking individual from a Western government, Canada, one of the leading powers in the world, coming forward and speaking about UFOs being real. And more to the point, I believe he spoke to the threat, or the potential threat, of UFOs and the alien presence and what it meant to us. Maybe if you could, and I have a few follow-up from that, but just the feeling, and as you indicated, the gravitas of somebody like him from his position stepping forward, and the importance of making such a statement.
Yeah, I think everyone here has things to say about this. I'll just offer my own take on it. Yeah, if you go through the history of the UFO subject, as far as everything that we've been able to learn through all the decades from World War II onward, there's no question, zero question, that these objects engage with nuclear technology. They're interested in it. Over U.S. nuclear weapons, we know this. And not simply the famous cases from the 1960s, but there were cases from all the decades of post-World War II. Missile launches, they engage in that, and other countries as well. There's a case from the early 50s about the Belgian Congo, when that region was still known as the Congo, of a uranium mine that was had a flyover by a fiery disc-like object, which a local fighter pilot tried to engage. We have all of these reports, and many, many more. So it's obvious that they are going to be interested in our military technology. They've demonstrated it. The question about potential threat is, that's a tricky issue to this day, because we hear a lot of debate over this. Are they a threat? Are they not a threat? Organizations like TTSA have brought this statement out as well. They've revived this idea of a potential threat. I wrote about it in my books. The thing is, it's not like they're doing an Independence Day blow up the White House scenario. There do seem to be encounters and engagements, and I think it's only responsible, like for people who are guarding national security of any nation. When you have unknown objects flying over airspace that no one's supposed to be flying over, you have to take it seriously. You'd be negligent in your job. So as a potential threat, it's fair to look at it. And I think sometimes sometimes people get hung up on this phrase threat, and they think, well, someone's fear mongering. They're trying to build up money for the defense establishment by talking about this as a threat. And I just don't agree with that. I think it's a legitimate thing to ask, but it's also important to ask ourselves, like, are they actually threatening us, or are they interested in threatening things that we are doing? I mean, as Stanton always said, we're the kids with the matches now and the explosives. And that could be a concern for any intelligent group that's watching us. So there's different ways to look at it.
It does. It really seems to be at that point in time, as we entered the Cold War in the 50s into the 60s, there were several cases of interference, we'll call it that, with nuclear missile silos in the US, Canada, Russia. I'm sure it happened elsewhere around the world for the few other powers that have nuclear capabilities. Yes. And as you said, as Stanton indicated, that, hey, we're the kids, all of a sudden we found the matches. What do we do with these? And to have a concern over their interference would be natural and definitely warranted. Was it a threat? I don't know that it was a threat, but it seemed to be a way for an intervention, or an indication that an intervention could potentially be made if we decided to actually strike one of those matches against the side of the box. As if they were saying, you might have these toys, you can look at your toys, you can think you can play with those toys, don't actually ever try to use them.
Well, actually,
would be a way of looking at it.
We struck that match about 2,000 times from the end of World War II until the end of the 20th century. We detonated in this world about 2,000, US plus the Russians plus everyone else. I think it's just over 2,000 nuclear detonations. So we've been playing a lot with those matches.
Yeah. Kathleen, I wonder
a lot of those are high atmospheric detonations that probably
sure,
did a lot of damage.
Kathleen, you having really intimate experiences with Stanton, how do you reflect back on how he saw this issue, or in terms of, I guess, the nuclear thing, and just sort of how whoever is out there is testing us with respect to this whole nuclear issue?
Well, Stanton told me, as Rich stated, that here we are, we have developed technology that could possibly destroy our planet. We could take that technology and take our brand of friendship out to them. And Stanton always liked to say that they're here to quarantine us. They do not want us to take our brand of friendship out there to possibly harm them.
So it's almost really what you're saying. It's almost like that movie, the 1952 movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still. You can do your own little fighting in the playground and in the sandbox, as that alien said. But if you start taking it beyond the perimeter of your own planet, we're going to have something to say about it.
Yes, as you indicated, Richard, there were 2,000 explosions that occurred around the world, both in the atmosphere and underground. I think it's more the indication from them that we were never going to be allowed to use them in anger after they were used actually twice in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that there would not be a repeat of those particular events. And actually, since that time, if you look at it from a very high level and allow decades to pass by like months, the demilitarization that occurred between the Western and Eastern powers during that time, the proliferation started to head back down again. We certainly don't seem to live under the nuclear threat that we had when we were children, as when Victor and I were kids and we had to practice nuclear bomb air raid drills in when you're in grade school, you know, practicing getting under the chairs, and even as a second grader looking, going, the hell is this going to do? I'm going to be vaporized.
If I might add something, because I met Paul. He was a very gracious person with a lot of gravitas. He did not wanted humanity to engage in a hostile attitude against the visitors. Right. That's an important point about him. He didn't want the military-industrial complex to take over this issue with a threat narrative. And he didn't consider them necessarily a threat, but that we should, you know, try to see the whole situation comprehensively, but not specifically as a threat. And that's also very important coming from this person, because he communicated with generals in the United States, according to his testimony, that told him about the secret research. He could not tell who they were exactly, but I believe him. And he came through as a very, very truthful person. So I don't think that the threat narrative was really what he was pushing. We have to be careful about that.
Richard, your comment on that?
I agree with Giorgio. I mean, Paul's position was, has always been, I think, very balanced about it. And I don't think anyone could accuse him of being a fearmonger about extraterrestrials. You know, Paul's emphasis has always been on the criminal nature of the money people at the top of our hierarchy, and he's got a lot to say on that. Mm-hmm. I would just add, as far as the nuclear threat goes, I wouldn't say that we're out of the woods, frankly. The Cold War with the Soviet Union is in a different, well, we're in Cold War II or III now. We've got that with Russia, and we've got that with China. You've got India with Pakistan. There's a lot of flashpoints in the world, and things can always get worse, but hopefully they will not. And it's worth asking, you know, have we been prevented by other intelligences from engaging in a hot war with nukes? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's beyond question that when I look at the long picture of probable monitoring and interaction with our species for many, many, many years, long time. But my current opinion is that it's possible that long-standing interaction was at a lower level, and that once we reach the 20th century with a technological explosion, you know, that changed things. In earlier times, what could really they do with us? What could we do with them? The answer is really not a lot. But with aviation, with radio, with telecommunications, with computers, with nuclear weapons, with space travel, artificial intelligence and quantum computing and nanotech and genetic engineering, and now 5G and total communication surveillance, like all of that, we're in a very different place now. So I think that we've got their attention. And I think our weapons and our capabilities have probably prompted a lot of the folks in the neighborhood to take a look at us.
Yeah, with that,
do you think that necessitates their intervention, or I mean, you're indicating that there's definitely reasons there for them to pay more attention to us. But it is almost as if you think about it, it's not necessarily as though these things are threats, but almost like we need to be guided and shepherded along the path and the proper utilization of these technologies and experiences. Maybe. If indeed they are here. Just watched. Well, go from the point of time where you've got a little toddler running around the house, and there's certain things you have to watch out for them that they don't, you know, fall into the pool or whatever. But it's more like we're teenagers with access to the car, and oh my God, the dangers that we can have, and the car leads you to the liquor store and everything else that goes along with that. It seems as though we are from a civilization perhaps at that stage, which means that if indeed they are our parents, which of course is a whole other discussion, that they are looking over their kids, their children, making sure that we behave and act properly with the toys and tools that we have. Is that what you see or feel?
I don't know. I don't know about that at all. I think some of the best answers are with abduction researchers. That's where I've gone these days. So maybe Kathleen would have a lot to say on this. My feeling is that to get any idea of motivations is really going to be tough, but it is possible that if we are judicious in analyzing the maybe what we can consider the best testimony of people who've had experiences that can be believable, that are drawn out in the best, most professional way, that might be the best way to get a handle on it. Because I'll just say one, and other people really need to contribute here because I don't want to be doing all the talking, but I think that there is a real possibility that we have to look at about some of these beings engaging in our civilization. And I hate to be the one to bring this up, but the ones who look like us, are they us? Dave Jacobs talked a lot about this, the human-looking hybrids. I have personally gotten a number of stories from very credible people who have told me about absolutely human-looking individuals who just did not strike them as human, telepathy and all of that. And I've come to believe it. And I know sounds like a crazy idea for some people, but what that agenda is really important to me. And they may be our friends, they may not be our friends, but to me, it's a definite potential reality to consider that there's levels of infiltration. We can even look at it that way, infiltration into our society. Benign or malign, that's the question.
From
I
the
think
perspective,
Manuel is there. Manuel is there. I can see him sitting. Manuel, I'd like you to comment on Richard's comment just now. I know you have some very strong views on that. Do you want to, share some of your views on what Richard just says about how we're being contacted?
Well, the thing is that in my experience with 30 years of research into the field, is that there are different groups that work with different agendas. It's one of the things that strikes me and keeps on puzzling me is the complete complexity of it all. Sure, Jacobs is right, but that's just one tiny piece of the puzzle. There's loads of other pieces too. I would say different groups with different agendas, and some of those indeed could pose a threat.
I wanted to add something that from the perspective of the Peruvian experiences, contact experiences mostly, at least the groups that contacted a lot of my friends and my family members also, do not want us to be dependent on them. They want us to, they may advise us, but they don't want us to depend on them. Now, they didn't say that they were all benevolent either. They also advised that there were some that were not benevolent and that they were protecting them, us from them up to a point. So it's a mixed bag.
That's a great point, Giorgio. And it's something I think all of us have seen and experienced with the people and folks that we know. Francisco also has experiences with people and personally regarding contacts and folks that he knows. And I'm not saying you personally, Francisco, but people that you know and experiences that have been passed on to you.
No, my comment was not about the contact. It was prior to that regarding Paul Hellyer and the threat narrative, if I may, or
that's fine.
Sure.
I wanted to ask Richard if is it possible that Paul Hellyer may have changed his mind during the time. Eventually, in the beginning, he may have suspected of a potential threat, and then during time with other having access to other information may have changed his mind, because his book, A Light at the End of the Tunnel, doesn't resonate with the threat scenario.
Yeah,
for example.
I think that's true. Remember when Paul Hellyer came out as a UFO person, I guess you could say, in 2005, he had just been reading Philip Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. In fact, he talked, in fact, this was something that Stan just groaned about to me, sitting in the front row. Stan was not happy, frankly, that that Paul was coming into the UFO field through Corso's book, because Stan did not support Corso's book. But be that as it may, Corso's book definitely focuses a lot on the potential threat. Like if you go back over it, Corso's opinion was that this is a potential issue here, a potential problem. So I would imagine that Paul's headspace would have been probably more in that mode back then. And yeah, I mean, I could see that he's moved away from that to a large extent.
Yeah, and I could see just with anybody, your view of something is going to be dependent upon your perspective. Okay, Paul was the Minister of Defense for Canada, so his viewpoint is going to be regarding the military and protection. Philip Corso, military, his view and the items that he was dealt with regarding the intelligence, the technology, the science, passing on those particular items for what was going on. It's yeah, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, to quote one of our panelists here. And so it really does depend upon your perspective. And you have very different from that. I mean, going back to, okay, contacts that individuals have had. In fact, Kathleen, multi-generational contacts that have occurred. And you look at it, it's going to be from a very different perspective and messages. And as one of the things that we want to be able to do here is with these different questions and experiences we're talking about is the why. Why did this happen? Not just necessarily what we saw, but why is this going on? It's not going to be all that evident to us regarding the information that's given or that we've seen, but we do need to move forward with our own thoughts and opinions as to what we see and what's going on. So Kathleen, from your perspective, which is not going to be from Paul's, it's not going to be from Philip Corso's, is going to be as an experiencer.
Well, first let me say that I'm the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. I am also an investigator, a researcher. I've worked on 3 major research studies on experiencers. The first one was small. The second one had 3,200 participants. It was the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Encounter. The third one was a 3-year study that we did at the Mutual UFO Network, and I am MUFON's Director of Experiencer Research. I head up a team of 45 investigators who speak with experiencers on a day-to-day basis. Personally, I have spoken with, I would say, at least 2,000. I don't keep count of the number. I'm also a hypnosis practitioner, a certified hypnosis practitioner. So I have information coming from a variety of sources. And I don't want to talk personally about anything that I personally was told, because I think that doesn't really matter. I think what matters is what the majority of experiencers are saying. And we had many open-ended questions. We wanted to know why they're here. And I want to say that the majority of individuals who have had these contact experiences, 71% from the Mutual UFO Network, said that they would not end these experiences if they had a choice. It was more than 80% for free. So that gives us an indication of what the majority of these non-human entities are doing, how they're accepted. And certainly the fear factor can color our perception of what is occurring. And I think that if we take a look at the investigators over the years, we had those who were on the negative side of it. Never trust an alien, they lie, they're manipulating us, they're extracting DNA from us without our permission. Then you have the other side, who are saying they're here to save us, they're here to assist in our development, they're benevolent. I'm sort of in the middle of all of this because I know that there are benevolent species. I've hypnotized people, I've investigated cases where these entities didn't take samples, where these entities said that they once lived on our planet and that there was an environmental collapse, that they had to leave our planet. They had the technology to do that. Not everyone could go, but their group went and they settled on another planet in our galaxy. And they say they come back from time to time to assist in our development. There are others, individuals who are having relationships with a species, the Greys. The ones I was talking about were human types. Now, with the Greys, their reputation isn't as good because you have Greys who appear not to have emotions, who have an interaction with individuals that can be rough and uncaring. But then the experiencers say that the taller ones appear to be sentient beings and they project emotions. They can't speak except for in our heads, but they project love. They say to experiencers, you're part of our family. I have to say that my Aunt Betty Hill, her dress underwent DNA analysis. And Phyllis Budinger, who was the analytical chemist who began the work on her case, and then sent the dress out for DNA analysis for samples, discovered that there's Chinese DNA on her dress. And that Chinese DNA is the same DNA that was found in the hair of the alien.
That tells you something right there regarding the potential different sourcing, as Manuel indicated, that what has amazed him through time in studying this is that there is not one alien agenda. There is not necessarily one group. There are several groups. There's reports of there being anywhere up to 70, 80, 90 different species, if you want to call it that we are interacting with. And I would imagine many of them are going to have their own agendas. Mm-hmm. But if you could somewhat group some of the feelings that the experiencers that you interfaced with as to what they thought was happening and why this was going on, what was their understanding of why? I would think if you were one of them, you'd have to go through this and just say, why did this happen to me? Why me? What's going on? Why are they asking me these questions? What do they want?
Well, there appears to be a longitudinal genetic study. They take people, these are the Greys, take people along family lines. They say that they are taking flesh samples in order to test the body for environmental toxicity. And to get to myself, that's one of the things that I was also told. I grew up just downhill from one of the worst environmental disasters, chemical dumps, Superfund site. I also grew up within range of a nuclear base. There was Pease Air Force Base. And then of course, across the river, there was the Navy base. And there they were building nuclear submarines. So they seemed to be interested in, again, this nuclear part. They tell many experiencers that they fear that we have reached a point where we could become extinct because of human activity. And of course, nuclear is one of the major ones. And then our environment and the possible collapse of our environment. They've been speaking to experiencers since 1954 about this. That's as far back as I have spoken with individuals.
So if I could, no, I just wanted to interject, Kathleen. I want Richard's comment on, we've got 4 or 5 different lenses through which to look at the whole UFOT issue. Okay, the lens you're portraying right now in terms of contactees, and then you have this whole idea of the military perspective of what this is, and the threat or non-threat of it. There are so many lenses through which we can look at this, or perspectives through which we can look at this whole issue on a grander scale. So what I'm trying to grapple with is, you know, if we are to prevent any kind of scenario to come forward, or at least predict or assess or analyze, which lens should we look through? This is totally confusing to me. So Richard, I'm going to throw that at you. I mean, is it a military lens? Is it a threat lens? Is it a contactee lens? Where does it happen to push this thing forward so that people can come to some kind of grips with this issue?
Yeah, it's a fair question, Victor. I just want very quickly to jump onto something Kathleen had just mentioned.
Yeah.
Which I didn't know, which is the fact that a DNA analysis of Betty Hill's dress had genetic traces of a particular Chinese genetics. Now, I mean, that's fascinating because as you were mentioning, Kathleen, the hair of the alien case, which is the Peter Curry case from 1992.
Mm-hmm.
92, yeah. We don't have to go into all the details, but there was a hair that was left behind this encounter that turned out to be, it wasn't just Chinese, it was a very, very ultra rare subgroup, you could say, of if I understand correctly, a group basically living almost an Aboriginal forest type existence, very remote. Whereas all of those individuals had black hair, but this particular hair, which was unbleached, they determined, was blonde. It's very bizarre, very, very bizarre. So it's a strand in that case that is very intriguing. And the fact that the 2 individuals that Peter Curry was encountering apparently disappeared right before his eyes just makes you wonder, who are these individuals? And they look mostly human. They look like human hybrid types, I guess. But I didn't know that the connection was there with Betty Hill's dress, Kathleen. So that is absolutely fascinating to me.
A recent development.
I don't know how I missed it. That's unbelievable. Do you know if it's the same subgroup? Because China's a big place.
Phyllis told me it was the same subgroup.
Unbelievable.
And that's why she has recently come forward and stated this.
That really needs some serious blowing out and follow-up. It's absolutely fascinating. Victor, I'll just quickly deal with your question about what's the best perspective. And I mean, the thing is with UFOs, UFOs has the most ultra steep learning curve. I mean, people think, you know, molecular biology or quantum physics has a steep learning curve. Well, I'm sure they do, but so does UFOs. This is a very demanding subject, and it requires a lot of different perspectives. So, and not just military or civilian, but we're talking scientific perspectives, philosophical perspectives, social perspectives, technology perspectives, biological perspective, like all of it, it's all there. Existential perspectives. All of it's really important for us to get a full grasp of this phenomenon. But as a way for us as a society to move forward with it, like I actually am, I'm not opposed to the idea of a potential threat. And it's not that I even think, I mean, I don't know what I think. It depends on the day of the week. How dangerous are they? I think that I agree with a lot of the other speakers here that we're probably dealing with multiple groups with multiple agendas, and that some of those agendas are dangerous. I personally believe that. And I also don't know that simply because a tall gray says soothing words to an abductee, like, you're important to us, you're part of our mission, we're here to help. I don't know if that's truthful. Like, I just don't know if that's truthful. Maybe it would be nice, but I don't know that. And maybe that's my own very all too human suspicious nature coming out. We have to be careful, but nonetheless. But I would say the idea of a potential threat is useful for one reason, because we have a world even now that is so apathetic. We've had 3 years of major mainstream publicity coming from the New York Times and elsewhere about the reality of this phenomenon. 10 years ago, if someone had asked me, like, if the New York Times were to cover this in a serious way, what would the reaction be? This is not the reaction that I would have expected, where we're still spinning our wheels, asking these kindergarten level questions like, you know, is this real? Are we being visited? Is this the Russians or the Chinese? Like, to me, these are ridiculous questions. It's not the Russians and it's not the Chinese. And yet we're still at this very, very basic low level conversation. So it just shows that our society's got such a long way to go before we actually start dealing with this, all of the complexities of this. So we have to wake up. And one way to wake up is, like, get the major media, get the political establishment. Yes, we know how corrupt they are. We know that there's a lot of control there. But we have got to start asking questions to the broader public. What the hell is going on? And when I wrote my 2 volumes of history of UFOs and the national security state, I focused, a lot of it was on military encounters. It's not that I thought military encounters were more important than civilian encounters. I mean, they're not really intrinsically, but the military encounters, to me, proved that our government was lying. And so that was why I like to focus on that. When you know that the military is chasing these things and they can't deal with them, and at the same time the government's lying about it, you know you've got a wedge to open this up. And I think that wedge is still valid. And so I think there's a lot of perspectives. We need to ask, what are these things for real? What's the technology? And why have there been lies from governments around the world for 70 plus years? I mean, that's what we have to be asking. And I just, honestly, I don't know if the public is ever going to get to that point. I honestly really wonder if we're ever going to get there. All the disclosures that have been happening up till now could very well stop right here, like right here. So all of the talk about the Tic Tac UFO and yes, we have the Navy, US Navy making admissions that this is real, and that's all very important. But it could stop right here in its tracks. There's nothing, in my opinion, to say that the momentum will carry us any further than where we've gone. And we could be at a new stage of the cover-up for another decade or 2 or 3 or 5. The new stage of the cover-up would be, yeah, we know that there's something real there, but we don't know what they are. Mm-hmm. Like, there's no admission of bodies. There's barely a hint of admission of recovered technology. Like, that may go somewhere, but it may not. It may not. And so we could just be at this new phase of keeping the secret. Like, the bulk of the secret is still removed from us. And we're just getting this bare bones recognition that, yeah, there's something there. It's kind of like updating the cover up, and that may be where we're at. The public may not, it's really possible the public may not get energized to do anything about this for a long time.
It's certainly one of the thoughts that are out there,
wow,
that the information that has come out about the Tic Tacs and some of the coverage it's just another step in the controlled dribbling out of information that if you keep doing it and you keep doing it slow enough, that you won't actually have to dive into what the real story is behind it. You know, why have there been the abductions, the genetic removal of material and DNA, all the way down to, you know, the hybridization, obviously, that has occurred. Yes, Richard.
The last thing I want to say here, I agree with you that there's a strong controlled element to what's happening, but I actually don't believe that the release of the information is part of that controlled element. So in other words, I personally do not believe that TTSA or the writers for the New York Times like Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, I do not believe that they are actively trying to be part of a controlled disinformation. I don't believe that, and I want to strongly make that statement here. But I do believe that there's control coming from beyond them. So I do believe that there's control coming from the upper echelons of the New York Times, for example, that's in bed with the national security establishment. So I do believe that the New York Times editorial policies are to throw as much cold water as possible on this. And I do believe that the policy of most of the establishment is to contain this new information as much as possible.
It does seem to be that way. Francisco, I think you had indicated some thoughts that you had regarding what we were discussing here with Richard.
Yeah, thank you. Two comments regarding this new phase of disclosure. It's for me, it's almost like it's a restart. The way they are putting it, TTSA, and the way the government is, the U.S. government is just responding is like, look, there's UFOs, or there's something flying over restricted airspace. We don't know if they're Chinese or Russia. We have to check it. Like erasing 70 years of the exact same phenomena that is happening. So it's like a restart. Let's see how the public deals with it right now in the 21st century. And let's eliminate all the history of sightings. And one other issue regarding the threat scenario, or the possible intervention, or the hypothesis of they are here to free us or help us. Because after the two detonations of the nuclear bombs in the end of the World War II, all the other 2,000 plus experiments were with stronger and stronger bombs, more powerful bombs. So if there was any thought of possible threat, they, seeing us that we are experimenting with more powerful and more powerful weapons, they should have, for an intelligent being, well, let's intervene, let's avoid more experiments until they reach to a very dangerous scenario. And if there was a threat, or eventually an intervention scenario, I think that they would not wait so long for, because the last one that was from the Russians, it was massive. The one that was detonated.
Just released this week. Yeah,
exactly.
They showed that the video of that.
If they wanted to
intervene,
or if there was any threat, they would have done it in the past. Right?
It seems like, yeah, right beyond the tests were allowed to continue, if you want to refer to it that way, allowed to continue. But the actual utilization,
it's a gamble.
Oh, it's a
why
huge
let
gamble.
us, right? We are very, we can be very mean. So why let us still experiment if they can use it for the wrong way?
It's a question we ask here quite often, the why. I can't help but think about at times I feel like I'm looking at the Wizard of Oz, and we're sitting here and the wizard up on the screen has something going on, and that up on the screen has to do with New York Times articles and the Navy coming out. Meanwhile, the wizard, meaning the government and the military, behind the curtain is pulling levers, turning wheels, and we have things going on such as, going back to 1987, Reagan to the UN stating, I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And then a couple of decades later, we have the formal creation, even though I don't think any of us really believes it was the actual creation of the Space Force. And now we have a new branch of the military, the Space Force, that is there. And to me, that almost seems like that is an activity, even though it is somewhat public, because it's hard to do unless you're going to continue to fund the Space Force and those activities via black budgets, that it needs to come out and be somewhat public. Now it's public, it's happening. The curtain's been pulled back a little bit. We're seeing some of the machinations that are going on. Meanwhile, there still is the screenplay in front of us here with the New York Times and Leslie Kean and Blumenthal and others who have published articles, whether or not they are witting or unwitting fools or players. I don't mean to call them fools, but I just mean in the term of they are doing the bidding of the wizard behind the curtain, who is actually pulling the strings here. So it does seem as though we still, at a minimum, have two separate paths that we are on. There's a very public path that, as Richard indicated, it's shocking the lack of response to these articles. And I mean, Trump has mentioned it. He's been interviewed by Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson has mentioned it. It's been on the national news with no giggle factor attached to it at all. And it's about one step short of the proverbial landing on the White House lawn by publishing on the front page of the New York Times. And what was the public's reaction to it? Oh, okay, that's nice. What do you got next?
The news cycle continues.
It sure does. The news cycle continues. What you got for me now?
Yeah. With that, Chris, I think we've just about reached our hour limit here with Richard. I want to thank all of our panelists, Francisco and Giorgio and Kathleen, Emmanuel, Richard. Do you have any parting thoughts for us to take away for the people that are trying to make sense of all of this, who are listening to this for the first time? Is there anything that you can say that might augur them on to do their own research and find out more about this whole intriguing issue?
Wow. Yeah. I was saying earlier, the UFO subject is a steep learning curve. And so for anyone who's new to it, don't expect to just jump in and figure it all out in your first month, first year, first 5 years. It takes a while. And because there's actually a lot of stuff to learn, a lot of history, and a lot of evidence to study and to ponder. But I would say that, moving forward, we're in the midst of a revolution in human society that's actually can't be separated from what we've been talking about. That is the presence of other beings here with us. The revolution that we're in is it's one that I'm absolutely convinced about now. So as human beings, we've lived through fundamentally three phases of existence, and only three phases. With all the variations, all the variety, we were hunters and gatherers for at least 200,000 years, as far as we can tell. For the last 10,000 years, we've discovered agriculture and sedentary animal husbandry and settled communities. For the first time, only in the last 10,000 years, roughly. And that gave us writing, that gave us the wheel, that gave us cities. And then really for the last 300 years, we moved into a third phase, which was dominated by science and industrialization, last couple of centuries. And that transformed our world yet again. So those are the three fundamentals. And we're now moving into a fourth phase. It's beyond science and industry, as far as I can see. It's a world in which technologically, everything will be centralized. Everything will be controlled. Not everyone will have jobs. Not everyone, it's going to be a completely new phase. Sometimes I call it the transhumanist phase, but it's more than biological transformation. It's social and technological. And one of the things that's marking it, like we can all see, is a consolidation of control over media and over information. And we've seen it all in the last 5+ years accelerating. And so what I guess I'm getting at here is it's a world of greater and greater levels of centralized control. I don't see any way out of it, personally. And the only way is that people will be able to live their lives is basically through fantasy and anger politics. Because when there's no purpose in your life, the only thing that gives you purpose is getting angry at something. Because that gives you moral position in which to say, I oppose those people over there, and that gives me meaning. And that's why I think anger politics has become so important, because increasingly, otherwise, life is becoming seen as meaningless. And so that's the danger that we have. And within that, we have this phenomenon of these other beings that are here somehow interacting. And getting at the truth of that could be harder, not easier, as we move forward, because we need great researchers, but we also need a way to get that message out to the rest of the world. And I just don't know if that's going to be easy to do. You do Google searches, they're all dishonest. The algorithms are complete lies. You search UFOs on YouTube, and all of your top hits are BBC, CBC, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all major media. And that's because the algorithm's dishonest. And so we have got, as a society, we've got to find a way to keep and maintain like a realm of freedom by which we can research and communicate. And that's not a given. Like, you really wonder what our society is going to look like 50 years from now. And will it be more free or less free? And will we have more knowledge and wisdom or less? We're going to have to really work at maintaining that space of freedom that we, I think, take for granted.
Wow, what a parting message.
Sorry.
Thank you so much, Richard. That's actually, we've got to get that on tape. Are we recording this? We are, aren't we? Yes.
Yes, we actually
wonderfully
are
done. No, that's a great parting message, because it's what it does. It looks forward for us, and I think that's what we need to do. So I want to thank you, panelists, Francesco Morea, Giorgio Vincenza, Kathleen Marden, and Manuel Lameroy, and of course our other co-host, Chris Iversen. Thank you so much for being part of this. And Richard, we need to do this again, because the conversation is never ending. And thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll have you back again.
You've been listening to the New Frontier Network.